little strange, but believe me, it all ties in. But it's just something I'm doing a major rabbit trail on because I find it interesting, and I'm teaching, so it's one of the penalties you will pay. So Ray, I'm going to pick on you, okay? Let's say, I have no idea, I've never been to your house, but let's say you have had your house and property assessed, and it's about $300,000. So I show up at your doorstep, and I have a chunk of gold. And it measures 1 inch by 2 inch by 12 inches. And I say, I'll tell you what, I'll trade you this for all your worldly possessions, which is your house and your property. You have 10 seconds to decide. We pretty much all would say no, right? Because 10 seconds, you don't make a life.
You said gold that big, but that big, gold bar?
Gold bar, 1 inch by 2 inch by 12 inches. But would you, in 10 seconds, decide? Yes. I should have asked you. Okay. Okay, so we'll see who made, or you say yes, you'd say no. We'll see who made the wise choice. But the subject of gold came up in our lesson last week. Gold has always fascinated me from an engineering perspective because it is so unlike most other metals. It's so unique, and it's got such amazing properties. I did a little research, but what I found as I was doing research is I was looking up gold references in the Bible. Do you realize, let me read for you, in Genesis 2, chapter 2, verses 10 through 12, gold is mentioned already. This is before Eve came along. This is when God was going to create in the Garden of Eden, and he was going to put Adam into it and then provide for him a helper. So let me read the reference to gold in Genesis, what did I say, 2 verses 10 through 12. A river flowed out of Eden to water the garden, and there it divided and became 4 rivers. The name of the first is Pishon. It is the one that flowed around the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold, and the gold of that land is good. So that's pretty amazing that right there at the beginning of the world, as we know it, gold is mentioned. When we started out in Answers in Genesis, we talked a lot about the animal groups and the plants, but when you think back at God created the heavens and the earth, there's a lot in the fact that he created the earth. And I think sometimes we forget to dwell on the amazing minerals and things that God designed within the earth for us to use. And gold is one of them. So a couple fun facts about gold. 50% of all gold is used in, what do you think? Jewelry. 40% is used in?
Electronics.
Nope. Just pure investments. Hank, that gold bar I brought up to you, I mean, people are socking this stuff away. And then 10% is industrial uses, a lot of electronics because of the properties of gold. Gold is the most malleable metal on Earth, and it can be drawn into a wire of a single atom width without theoretically breaking. I don't think they can do it. Leaves can be beaten so thin that it can become transparent. So light can pass through it, and it's kind of a greenish blue hue to it. And it strongly reflects infrared light. I remember as a kid, the big Apollo, the landing on the moon, and I remember seeing pictures of the astronauts with those great big visor domes, and they had a gold tinge to them. Well, they actually had gold on their visors because it's a good reflector of infrared light. So if you really want to get the really expensive sunglasses, ask if they're plated in gold, I guess. So just a couple other things. Well, I created this picture. This is a $300,000 brick of gold. And I remember I said 12 inches. This is 7 3/16 inches by 1 by 2. That's a $300,000 bar of gold. The one Jim picked is just a little over $500,000. So Jim, you chose wisely. Now you see this little itty bitty square there? That is an ounce of gold. It's 7/16 by 7/16 by 7/16. That's an ounce. And as of last week's market price, that little piece of metal is worth $1,870. Now this is amazing to me too. You can stretch that one little cube of gold to a 5-micron diameter, which is 2/10,000ths of an inch, 50 miles. A wire, 50 miles from that little block. You can also beat this little block flat. Guess how many square feet it can cover? I don't think they can do it physically because we don't have the equipment, but just take a wild guess. 300 square feet. 300, that's like a 17.3 inch, or 17.3 foot by 17.3 foot. I mean, gold is amazing. And so what got me thinking about this is, remember when God was giving the instructions for the tabernacle, everything was either plated in gold, which you can see how wonderful gold is for plating, because you can make it so thin, or even like the lampstand with solid gold. And it occurred to me that not only did God give instructions how to build it, he prepared men, craftsmen to build it, but he planned this thing out to the atomic level. He designed a material that he could use in his temple for the purposes he wanted. I don't know, they just like, and how gold got to be so valuable, is beyond me. Because when you think about it, gold is great because it doesn't corrode, it doesn't react with other chemicals, and it's got a very bright, beautiful luster to it. But back in ancient times, there wasn't any real useful purpose for it, right? You couldn't make tools with it. All it was good for was its beauty. And it sounds like from the get-go, gold is always considered super valuable. And it's about twice as heavy as steel. That's why you could pan for golden rivers so easily, because all the other junk floats off the top, or you can get off the top, and the gold sits down. Anyway, I've rambled enough about gold, but I just find that fascinating when we're talking about all this gold in the tabernacle. God designed a material that could be used that way in those times. Couple of things I would like to talk about just before we get into our lesson too. I want to talk about Joshua because he's going to become more and more of a player now that we're getting into Numbers. And a couple references to Joshua before we get to today's lesson. Back in Exodus 17:8, I don't think we covered this, but the Amaleks attacked the people of Israel, and there was a big battle. And Moses picked Joshua to pick the fighting men and go out and fight that battle. Remember the story? As long as he held his staff up, they would win. And his arms got weak, Moses. And Aaron and Hur held them up, so that gave them victory. But Joshua was behind that. And then who went up on the mountain with Moses to get the 10 Commandments? Joshua. And remember, he was faithful. When they went back to the camp and heard all the revelry, he thought they were being attacked. So that shows that his perseverance. He waited there 40 days for Moses without returning, apparently. And then I would like to read a little. We're jumping all the way to Numbers today, and there's a lot of things we're not going to talk about between the end of Exodus and Numbers, but I want to cover one thing in Exodus 33, verses 7 through 11. they refer to the tent of the meeting, and we haven't really talked about that, but the tent of the meeting was a tent that was outside of, well, I'll read it. It basically explains it here. I said 33, 7 through 11. Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people would rise up, and each would stand at his tent door and watch Moses until he had gone to the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar cloud, this is really amazing. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses. That's pretty key. He actually spoke to him. And when all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise up and worship each at the tent door. Thus the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as man speaks to his friend. When Moses turned again into the camp, his assistant Joshua, son of Nun, a young man, would not depart from the tent. So there he is again. He's his assistant. He actually goes into the tent with Moses. That's pretty incredible. Okay. So today's lesson. But first, kind of a memory jogger. When we talked about the tabernacle last week, we talked about the various items in it. And we made connections with Moses and Christ, some of the similarities, some of the differences. Does anything stand out, or does anybody remember any of those that we talked about? Kind of an example of Christ's coming.
Moses was an intermediary between people.
Right. Moses acted as the intermediary. How about the physical properties inside of the tabernacle? The light, the lamp that never went out. And Jesus refers to himself as the light of the world. And as the bread, right? And I guess even the sacrifice, the endless sacrifices for sin. You know, they would take care of it for that moment, but then all of a sudden, what's the point? It almost becomes that way because there is no sacrifice that would completely wipe out your sin. And I think what stands out most to me when I think about the tabernacle are the big curtains, the separation from God. And who could access God once a year? High priest. And that's why Paul uses and talks about the high priest as being Jesus, the ultimate high priest, who can stand before God with no curtain, with no smoke to be between him and God and to intercede for us. And so, so that was pretty cool. So let me read this introduction because they do it really good. Even before the tabernacle had been built, God told the Israelites that they were to leave Sinai. About a year later, the tabernacle was completed. And after they had celebrated the second Passover with the Exodus, the cloud lifted from the tabernacle and the Israelites followed it. As it had become their pattern, the Israelites complained about their circumstances, and God consumed many of them with fire. Some of the non-Israelites who left Egypt with them complained against God's provision of manna, recalling the wonderful food and they freely enjoyed in Egypt. Oh yeah, they had a great time. This spread to the rest of the congregation, and God and Moses became angry. For the second time, God sent a mind-boggling number of quail to meet the request of the people, but also sent a plague to judge them while the meat was yet in their teeth. That's in Numbers 11. Now, not only did the Israelites rebel against Moses, but Aaron and Miriam also sought to overthrow Moses. So this is kind of the things that are happening between where we were last week and where we're going this week. But that's a great story in Numbers 12 where Miriam and Aaron are questioning Moses' leadership. They want to elevate themselves. And boy, does God ever teach them a lesson. Also in Numbers 12, it says that Moses is the meekest person on the face of the earth. That's quite a statement when you think about it. On the face of the earth. And he also gets kind of, if you in today's lingo, he gets in Aaron and Miriam's face and says, listen, I talk to most of my prophets through visions and dreams. I talk to Moses directly. That's how close we are. And you dare to try to take that away from us? And so, does anybody remember what he does to Miriam? Yeah, she's leprous. And what does Moses do? Go, ha, 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 you deserved it. No, he does what Moses does. He just pleads for her healing in front of God. And God says, okay, she's going to suffer for 7 days. She goes out, comes back, and they move on. But I just think that's a tremendous story in itself. You could probably devote a whole Sunday school class to that. Okay, so now we're going to we're going to cover a lot of reading, so I hope it works, but we're going to have someone else read it that from the internet, so nobody gets stuck with it, and it's kind of fun because they use different voices. But we're going to read Numbers 13, talk about that, and Numbers 14, the entire chapters. You kind of have to read these chapters completely. Well, you should with the whole Bible, but in this particular case, to really understand what's going on. So if you want to turn there, hopefully the audio works, and you should be able, it's going to be ESV, so you should be able to follow it on the screen. And so if we want to give that a shot, let's just read Numbers 13.
The Lord spoke to Moses, saying,
Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them.
So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of them men who were heads of the people of Israel, and these were their names.
From the tribe of Reuben,
Shammua the son of Zachar.
from the tribe of Simeon,
Shaphat the son of Hori.
from the tribe of Judah,
Caleb the son of Jephunneh.
from the tribe of Issachar,
Igal the son of Joseph.
from the tribe of Ephraim,
Hoshea the son of Nun.
from the tribe of Benjamin,
Paltai the son of Raphu.
from the tribe of Zebulun,
Gadiel the son of Sodai.
from the tribe of Joseph, that is, from the tribe of Manasseh,
Gadai the son of Susai.
from the tribe of Dan,
Amiel the son of Gemalli.
from the tribe of Asher,
Sether the son of Michael.
from the tribe of Naphtali,
Nabai the son of Vapsai.
from the tribe of Gad,
Guel the son of Makai.
These were the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land. And Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said to them,
Go up into the Negeb, and go up into the hill country, and see what the land is, and whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, whether they are few or many, and whether the land that they dwell in is good or bad, and whether the cities that they dwell in are camps or strongholds, and whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are trees in it or not. Be of good courage, and bring some of the fruit of the land.
Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob, near Lebo Hamath. They went up into the Negeb and came to Hebron. Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were there. Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. And they came to the valley of Eshcol, and cut down from there a branch with a single cluster of grapes. And they carried it on a pole between 2 of them. They also brought some pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol, because of the cluster that the people of Israel cut down from there. At the end of 40 days they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him,
We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit.
However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan.
But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said,
Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it.
Then the men who had gone up with him said,
We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are.
So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying,
The land to which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height.
And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them.
Okay, great. Now do you see why I didn't want to read that? I would still probably be on verse 7, stumbling over all those names. Wow, what a story so far. So, how many men, this is kind of redundant, but how many men was Moses sending into the land? I don't have that many fingers, 12. Each representing a tribe of Israel, right? What were the spies to do on their journey? Oh, can you go to the next slide, Greg, just as it, so we can kind of dwell on it? Okay, it's kind of small, but we'll talk about that. So what were the spies to do on their journey? Several things, right? Assess the people, right? What's that? Are there trees? Right. See what the, right, not just the people, but what does the land look like? And what's that? Fruit. What kind of food is available? You know, it's referred to, and we talk about that, the land of milk and honey. That's kind of a phrase that they've used all, you know, we're going to, God says, you're going to be led into the land of milk and honey, and that's just a general description of great things, you know, milk and honey, the two. So, also the fortified strongholds, right? So is this a good tactic for any military excursion? Absolutely. You got to know what you're up against. But I also think that maybe it was a test. And we'll see as this story unfolds. They failed it miserably. So, would you get the food and the fruit on the way out or the way back? Yeah, obviously. So, whom did they find in Hebron? Who do they call it specifically? The descendants of, yeah, Anak in particular. You know, wouldn't that be a great arch enemy of the Avengers? Anak is here. Anak. It just sounds like, oof. Yeah. And they found in Hebron the descendants of Anak, namely Ahiman, see why I didn't read it? Shishah and Talmai. Who are the Anak, and why is this important to their mission of the spies? Well, who were these people? Why did they impress the spies so greatly? They were huge. They were big people. I'm surprised they didn't see any NBA recruiters, but that was a joke. You can laugh if you want. What? I'm sorry. These people were afraid of fighting giants. I mean, look at Goliath later on. They figure he was a descendant of this group. And he terrified a whole nation, just one man. So they found him very terrifying. And they're also mentioned in Deuteronomy 2, chapter 2 and chapter 9. I wish they would have said how tall they were, but they speculated, I think, I don't know where they came from, so don't take this as gospel, but I think they speculated Goliath was somewhere around 9 feet. So, okay. What figure of speech, we already covered this, is describe the land and what does it mean? So we talked about milk and honey. It doesn't necessarily mean it's taken literally, but it's intended to convey that it was rich and fertile land. How long were the spies gone for? 40 days. Isn't that interesting? 40 days on the mountain, 40 days. 40 days Jesus is in the wilderness. I mean, 40 is a number that keeps getting repeated, and I didn't do a study on that, but yeah, it's a significant number in the Bible. One thing, I don't think this covers it, but did you notice when they were in verse 8, when they were sending out the spies and naming them all, they named Hoshea as one of the spies. And so if you read that, you go, wait a minute, there's no Joshua. But in verse 16, it says Moses changes his name from Hoshea to Joshua. I found that kind of interesting. So I looked it up, and Hoshea means he saves, which I assume it's referring to God. And Joshua means Yahweh saves. So more specific, I guess. So all those references I gave you to Joshua earlier, this is just me talking. I didn't do any study on this, but why didn't they call him Hoshea back in the other encounters, do you think? I've got my own theory, but I think it's because, not to confuse the people, that when the scriptures are written, they may not connect Hoshea back then to Joshua, so they just used the name Joshua all the way through, even though his name was changed at this point. I found that intriguing. Why would Moses do that? I guess we'll have to ask him if we can find him in heaven. It's going to be a lot of people. 40 days. Why did it take so long? Well, if you look at, it says here from Kadesh in the south of Rehob to the north is about 180 miles. So down at the bottom, Kadesh Barnea, all the way up to Rehob, 180 miles. That was all done on foot, and that was all done in stealth, right? I mean, and they had to live off the land probably. Maybe they, who knows, disguised themselves as travelers to get some food. Who knows what they did to get through there. But that's quite a perilous journey. And I'm guessing that some of them didn't go as high, but some did. It says they scoped out all the land, especially particular tribes that come back and report. So yeah, it took some time. And then in verses 27 to 29, what did the spies generally report? Yeah, there was no doubt about that, right? God led us perfectly. He said it was fertile, and it was fertile. Can you imagine the gob of grapes they brought back? It took 2 men with poles. I mean, that must have been quite a cluster of grapes. But they also said, yeah, let's not be dramatic, guys. It swallows up its inhabitants. Like, wow. Like, you can't just say, yeah, they had quite a few soldiers, had some tall walls, but no, it swallows its inhabitants. Heavily fortified cities. And, yeah, they were real dramatic about it. What 5 people groups are identified as the occupying the land? It's interesting. The Amalekites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites, and the Canaanites. Well, there's more on there than those particular people groups. And in a minute, I'll read something out of Exodus 23 where God tells them what areas to conquer, and he includes a lot more of them. So, yeah, so they covered the ground pretty well. And what other name was used for the descendants of Anak? Nephilim. Nephilim. How do you say it? You heard it, everybody. I'm not repeating it. Were these the same Nephilim mentioned in Genesis 6:4? Right. Right. Unless they were a stowaway in the ark, which they weren't. I didn't say that. They were hanging on to the anchor. Right. 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 So somehow their height was reinvigorated through the repopulating of the earth. Right. So don't get those two confused. So getting on the dramatic bandwagon, in verse 33, what figure of speech did they use to describe these people? As referring to the Israelites. Grasshoppers. What do you do to grasshoppers? You scrunch them, right? We're grasshoppers. So remember, in today's politically charged society, it doesn't take much to get people flying off the handle, a couple headlines in the news. So all these people are listening to this report, and these dramatizations are probably not helping the situation much either. They're getting the people revved up. And here comes Caleb out of the blue. Good old Caleb. What was his response to the discouraging news? What's that? He quieted the people. And then how did he talk? He said, let's go. Let's go. What is the deal here? It's like God said he was going to give us these lands. What don't you guys understand? Boy, that's amazing, especially if you contrast that with the 10 others. Now, it doesn't speak specifically to Joshua here, but he was on the same bandwagon. But think about that. He's all these people are hearing all this bad news, and then here comes Caleb, bold Caleb, going against the grain of what everybody's thinking, or most everybody, and speaks what God. It's like, hey, let's do it. We can do it. We're strong enough. So we're going to find out what happened now in verse. Before we go to chapter 14, I would like to read one passage. It's like, how many times did the people of Israel get in their heads or be told that God was giving them the promised land? God was going to take them into their own land and set up their own nation. And I'm not looking for a specific number, but did he say it to Abraham? Did he say it to Isaac, Jacob, all the way down the line? And when I would like to read the small little passage in Exodus 23, even when Moses was receiving the civil law from God on the mountain, God mentions it again. So it's read to the people. So this is pretty fresh in their minds. It's not something like, oh yeah, remember that promise Father Abraham got? So I'd like to read verses 20 through 23 of chapter 23. So this is titled Conquest of Canaan Promised. Behold, I send an angel before you to guard you on the way and bring you to the place that I have prepared. Pay careful attention to him and obey his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. But if you carefully obey his voice and do all that I say, then I will be an enemy to your enemies and an adversary to your adversaries. When my angel goes before you and brings you to the Amorites, the Hittites, and the Pezerites, and the Canaanites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, I will blot them out. You shall not bow down, and it goes on to say, you will not bow down to their gods or serve them. So basically saying, the Lord names the tribes by name and says, you're going to take them out. So the people really aren't without any kind of excuse here, right? They knew exactly what God told them, and yet they still decided to fall into the mob mentality. So if we can now do Numbers 14, which is a little bit longer of a chapter, and see what the consequences were of these reports.
Numbers 14. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them,
Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness? Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?
And they said to one another,
Let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt.
Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the people of Israel. And Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and said to all the congregation of the people of Israel,
The land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey.
Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them.
Then all the congregation said to stone them with stones. But the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. And the Lord said to Moses,
How long will this people despise me? And how long will they not believe in me, in spite of all the signs that I have done among them? I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them. And I will make of you a nation greater and mightier than they.
But Moses said to the Lord,
Then the Egyptians will hear of it, for you brought up this people in your might from among them. And they will tell the inhabitants of this land, They have heard that you, O Lord, are in the midst of this people. For you, O Lord, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands over them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and in a pillar of fire by night. Now if you kill this people as one man, then the nations who have heard your fame will say, It is because the Lord was not able to bring this people into the land that he swore to give to them, that he has killed them in the wilderness. And now, please, let the power of the Lord be great as you have promised, saying, The Lord is slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love, forgiving iniquity and transgression, but he will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation. Please pardon the iniquity of this people according to the greatness of your steadfast love, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt until now.
Then the Lord said,
I have pardoned according to your word. But truly, as I live, and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness and yet have put me to the test these 10 times, and have not obeyed my voice, shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers. And none of those who despised me shall see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land into which he went, and his descendants shall possess it. Now, since the Amalekites and the Canaanites dwell in the valleys, turn tomorrow and set out for the wilderness by the way to the Red Sea.
And the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying,
How long shall this wicked congregation grumble against me? I have heard the grumblings of the people of Israel, which they grumble against me. Say to them,
As I live, declares the Lord, what you have said in my hearing I will do to you. Your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and of all your number listed in the census from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me, not one shall come into the land where I swore that I would make you dwell, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua the son of Nun. But your little ones, who you said would become a prey, I will bring in, and they shall know the land that you have rejected. But as for you, your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and your children shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years, and shall suffer for your faithlessness, until the last of your dead bodies lies in the wilderness, according to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, a year for each day. You shall bear your iniquity 40 years, and you shall know my displeasure.
I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely this will I do to all this wicked congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall come to a full end, and there they shall die.
And the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation grumble against him by bringing up a bad report about the land, the men who brought up a bad report of the land died by plague before the Lord. Of those men who went to spy out the land, only Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh remained alive. When Moses told these words to all the people of Israel, the people mourned greatly. And they rose early in the morning and went up to the heights of the hill country, saying,
Here we are! We will go up to the place that the Lord has promised, for we have sinned.
But Moses said,
Why now are you transgressing the command of the Lord, when that will not succeed? Do not go up, for the Lord is not among you, lest you be struck down before your enemies. For there the Amalekites and the Canaanites are facing you, and you shall fall by the sword, because you have turned back from following the Lord. The Lord will not be with you.
But they presumed to go up to the heights of the hill country, although neither the ark of the covenant of the Lord nor Moses departed out of the camp. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites, who lived in that hill country, came down and defeated them and pursued them, even to Hormah.
Wow, so many lessons in that chapter.
Numbers 15.
You guys want to keep going? No. What is interesting, what does it remind you of the dialogue between Moses and the Lord in this passage? Does it remind you of anything?
It was basically the same conversation he had when they built the golden calf.
Right, exactly. When the Lord told Moses what was going on down in the lowlands, the Lord made the same threat, and Moses made the same defense. It's really interesting, isn't it? So, get up, hustle here. So it's pretty obvious how the Israelites chose to respond to the news of the spies in verses 1 through 4. And how did Moses and Aaron respond? They basically laid out before the Lord, and yeah, they were very distraught, crying out to the Lord. And then Joshua and Caleb also reacted by tearing their clothes, which was a sign of super grief, because it wasn't like there was a J.C. Penney's around the corner, I'm sure. It's like when you ripped your clothes, you were serious about your displeasure or grief. And then the reasons Joshua and Caleb gave for taking the lands, because God delighted in them. And they were not out to rebel against God. And how did the people respond? Wasn't this an amazing response? They wanted to stone Joshua and Caleb, and presumably, possibly Moses and Aaron too. Stone them, kill them. Wow. Remind you about anything that's going on today? It's mob mentality, I'll tell you. What stopped them from stoning the leaders? And here's where the tent of the meeting comes back into play. God's glory appeared once again at the tent of the meeting. And then we covered this, so I'll buzz over it, but how did God respond to their complaining? He basically said, okay, I'm taking them out. You're going to be the nation now. And Moses uses basically the same argument. He used on Mount Sinai saying, Lord, the enemies of Israel will see this and interpret it as you're weak, and and then God relented once again from destroying the people. But there's always a price to pay, isn't there? There's always a price to pay. And this is kind of an interesting kind of a side note. How many times did God say the people disobeyed them? So I don't want to get into this, but that's kind of a common. You ever tell your kids, if I told you once, I told you a million, 1,000, 100 times, or I've told you. So it's kind of a phrase that appears in the. They gave us some references. So it could mean literally God added them up, or he just uses it figuratively for a great number of times. It's not like one or two times they did it. So I just found that kind of interesting. And then, of course, the sad thing is the people were barred from entering the promised land. And what else did God what were some of the stipulations with that barment of the promised land? What did he say about persons 20 years and over? You're never going in. Can you imagine if you just celebrated your 20th birthday the day before? So it's like, but anyway, yeah, it's like you guys are not going. Now, he could have snuffed everybody, like he threatened, he could have snuffed everybody out then, but he showed great mercy at the same time he's displaying judgment, right? How we might get to that question, so I'm jumping ahead of myself. Well, let's do it. So how did God, we understand the judgment part. He said, okay, you're not going in. But how about the mercy part of his decision? What's that? The children would, that's one. But what did he do for all the people? Gave them 40 more years of being taken care of, right? Out in the wilderness. Now, I'm not saying their lives were peachy, but probably beat death. I mean, he didn't, other than the 10 spies, which I didn't realize until I read this passage really closely. I never realized that the 10 spies died of the plague. But, yeah, they could have died of plague or something, but they basically just died out of old age. And God took care of them the whole time. Which also leads into another discussion we could go on. Did Joshua and Caleb deserve this? And Moses and Aaron and any other righteous people? But did they all have to submit to the same rules of God? So it kind of shows you, if God judges a nation, the good people, the people that follow the Lord, will suffer along with the people that displease God. So something to think about. But our suffering would be way different because we're suffering for the Lord and not because we're opposing the Lord. So that's something to think about too. And then what happened to the 10 faithless spies, like I said, I didn't never realize before, but they had untimely deaths due to a plague, which probably couldn't have been pleasant. And another interesting thing I thought about is Caleb and Joshua had 40 years to, I don't think, this is just me speculating, but they probably used these 40 years to hone their leadership skills, and the people would populate again and learn various things. I'm not sure that you could just say for 40 years they never accomplished anything. So maybe this was a learning time for Joshua too, to be a great leader, which he turns out to be after the 40 years. So this was, I found interesting. In verse 25, God had commanded the Israelites to return to the wilderness of Paran, the next day. What did they do instead? Yeah. They did realize they sinned, but they took it upon themselves. Without God's blessing, without Moses' blessing, with nobody in leadership's blessing, they just said, oh man, we screwed up. We really want to get into that land. They came to their senses basically, but in the wrong way, and they decided to do it on their own. You can also draw a good parallel with doing things on our own today without God involved. It's like fruitless, it's futile, and boy, did they get slam dunked. I find it interesting that these same cowardly people that are cowering and so scared do a 180 and attack. Here again, it's got to be mob mentality. It's like whatever the major group thinks, everybody jumps on board. I think they're more afraid of the 40 years. Yeah. That's true too. Yeah, very good point. That 40 years would be 40 years. A reminder of your cowardice. Right, and not just that, but for those over 20, it's like, I'm never going to see the promised land ever. Yeah, good point. They probably weighed the alternatives and said, okay, attacking maybe isn't such a bad idea. So I want to finish up by turning to Hebrews 3, verses 16 through 19. I'll just read it off the screen. For who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not all those who left Egypt led by Moses? And with whom was he provoked for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief. Again, a great reference from the New Testament, calling out the Jewish history and what the people of Israel did. Because of their unbelief. So if you were to sum up the last two chapters we read as something that you could really apply to your life, I'll go first. This is what I got out of it. I thought about this and I say, we may not always be punished directly for not following the Lord's will, or maybe we wouldn't recognize it, but we will always miss out on his blessings for doing so. I mean, I think about all the people, especially missionaries. Missionaries came to my mind. A lot of missionaries go out in the field. They know they're following God's will, and they're not necessarily sure of where they're going to end up or what they're going to do, and sometimes even how are we going to survive? And I've never heard one yet not saying, God took care of us, he blessed us. We were just lavished in his blessings. And I think we all probably have personal testimonies where when we did trust God, he blessed us far more abundantly than we could ever ask or think. And it's kind of a punishment in itself to miss out on that, isn't it? It's like, so it's not like you're not necessarily going to get slam dunked, but you're going to miss out on so much by not following the will of the Lord. Okay, so that's what I got out of it. Any other thoughts, comments? Yeah. It is. Like I said, you could go on so many different. Pastor could make a whole year of sermons out of this, I think, and not scratch the surface. I don't mean that derogatory. I mean, it's awesome. The deeper you dig into the scriptures, the more just the richness and fullness that is there. But yeah, and here again, it's so easy to judge the Israelites, but when we think of ourselves and the people around us, it's like, it doesn't take much to get us revved up and thinking the wrong way. So we just need to be true to God and follow in his way. Yes, sir.
I'm still trying to think of why did he choose age 20 and below to go into the promised land? Why that age? Is that the age that we're responsible for, the age of reason, which is supposedly according to Jewish way back 12, 7, who never knows what it is. But you always wonder about our teenagers nowadays, whether they're totally responsible for what they do.
You know, Joshua and Caleb were very, very young men at this point. I mean, you could argue, I did a study once where I believe it was like 20 years when Joshua went into the wilderness. He was 20 years old, roughly. And then 40 years in the wilderness, and then he lived another 50 years. So he was 110 years old when he died. So the amount of responsibility on the younger people was immense back then. And you can also contrast with your typical stereotype teenager today. Yeah, it might have been a whole different world back then too, as far as. But yeah, that's a very interesting question. Why 20? Why not 21? Why not 18? Why? Maybe we can get God to answer that for us someday. Okay. Anything else? Yes, sir. Right.
But it speaks to really anyone, the people of God, trying to do something in their own strength, and just how futile, like you said, how futile it is.
That's a good lesson for our church too. I mean, we may hear something we don't like, and first thing we want to do is talk to someone else about it and get people on your side. It's just the sinful human nature, but we should go to God first with it and ask him what we should do about it, that type of thing, you know. Always put God first. All right, well, we're out of time. Thank you very much. Sorry about the gold thing, but I just find that so interesting. So.